Morning everyone, hope you had a good weekend. It is 3 degrees here in country Victoria. It's a nice fresh wintry morning still. But this weekend the dahlia season officially started here on the farm. So what does that mean in the middle of winter? So that means we've gone through our tubers which we're going to show this year. So particularly just the ones for me personally, and also ones I need to take more stock of or need more cuttings of. So we start to wake them up so we can take cuttings from the tubers in a, I guess, controlled environment, ready for the season. And there's a couple of reasons why we do this over just keeping our tubers. So in terms of showing, my personal choice is that I would like to show flowers which have come from a cutting in that first year's growth. And some people might wonder why I do that. Well, there's a couple of reasons. One of the main reasons is if you think about a tuber, I call a tuber like the lazy teenager who's wrapped up nice and warm in bed, and when summer comes around or early spring, it's like, oh yeah, we'll start to move, we'll do a bit of growing, and you know, then it'll start to come out the ground, and about 90 days later, we start to get those first blooms. But pretty much that tuber's been given everything in the possible it needs to survive. So it's got all the food, nutrition and energy stored in that little tuber. So whilst they grow, and they grow very well, they can be a little bit sluggish. Whereas if you compare that to a brand new fresh cutting which has no reserves, so no little warm blanket and no energy, it has to go looking for that. So because it has to go looking for the food, it's really vigorous. And also if you think about what the tuber does in terms of storage over winter, the tuber keeps it alive. And if a little cutting hasn't got that, well, it needs to make that. So it needs to survive. So in order to survive in the plant world, we need to flower. We need to have the biggest flowers, the best flowers, so the bees come along and go, woohoo, I'm going to pollinate you. And after that's done, the succession continues for that plant. So that's why for me personally, when I'm thinking about showing, I go for a cutting plant, because in many cases I will actually get a better bloom than I may have done off a tuber. And so another reason why I like to take cuttings on the farm is if we think about the last couple of seasons in Australia, we've had very wet springs, which have gone well into Christmas. And as we know, tubers get in the ground where it's still wet and damp. A, they're prone to rot, and B, they just don't thrive very well. And then we bring them into it all the host of other issues of pests and everything else. Whereas if you think about the cutting again, who hasn't got the tuber? All it has is a really healthy formed root ball. So the fact we've studied these cuttings now so that they've got a really nice small established plant ready for the garden in November, which is typically when we're putting that first tuber in the ground. A, it's already ahead of its growth cycle, and also there's no tuber to rot. So if we do happen to get a really wet spring, A, I've got the tuber still in storage, so I've got my succession of that plant if I need it, and B, I've got plants in the ground ready to grow. So in terms of the cut flower industry, I'm going to be almost ready to start having flowers 90 days. So in terms of taking your own cuttings, there's a couple of things you're going to need. So here at the Olde Creamery, obviously we've got quite a large setup, and this will actually hold up to 1,000 cuttings per fortnight. But in terms of being successful with your cuttings, you're going to need 3 things. So we're going to need to provide some heat. So in ours, we have a sunbed, which has got some underground wiring, which produces heat. So I have that set to about 30 degrees, which you're probably going to go, whoa, that's a bit hot. And it is a bit hot, but actually what we're trying to do is get the soil temperature, and because the air is still quite cold, so having it at 30 degrees means that my soil temperature in my tuber pots averages sits at around the 22 to 25 mark, depending on the day. And as you can see right at the back here, our first one has just started. So then we need to supply a form of light. So these lights are LED, so they cost really nothing to run. And I got 2 for $100. So I've only got 3 runs here, or 3 pairs, so 6 lights. So $300, I got it all, and they can be easily adjusted on these little ratchet systems, which is really, really cool. But I'll show you a simpler setup as well in about 5 seconds when we go into my secondary area. And then we need water. So these are on a automatic mister, which for cuttings, if you can invest in some form of automatic misting, I would definitely recommend it, because you can control how often they're getting misted, adjust as your plants need it as we get a bit warmer into the season, and your success rate will definitely go through the roof. if you can invest in some sort of misting system, this one wasn't expensive. I think the controller was about $60, and then the rest of it is just poly pipe, as you can see. And we've got the micro jets on, and I also then just put taps in so I can turn them on and off depending on what I've got in here. For example, we've got seeds in at the moment, and they need to be kept moisture all the times. But my daily tubers at the end, I don't want to water them at the moment, but they're in that warm, humid environment still, and I can sprinkle them with water as needed, so that tap is off. So the brand I chose to use when we set this up is HoseLink, and it runs a 9-volt battery, and I can tell you we've had this going since probably very early June, if not even May, and I'm still on the same battery, and it will flash to tell you when the battery is going low apparently, and hasn't been an issue yet. So as you can see at the moment, because it's mainly just got seeds in there, I'm running it for 20 seconds every 6 hours, and it just keeps the soil trays moist. And even though that sounds like a lot of water, remember we've got the heat pad in there, so that soil dries out quite quickly. When I first put cuttings in, I have it even more frequent, so it's actually spraying for 5 seconds every 5 minutes for the first 3 to 4 days. And that, what we're really trying to do at that early stage is avoid any moisture loss from the leaves. So a simpler setup for you at home would be to have a couple of the really cheap heat mats. Well, I say cheap, but they're not overly expensive in terms of what you can get, and you pick them up off eBay. Now, I'd also recommend these reflective mats. Now, you can buy them in a packet off eBay as well, but they're exactly the same as the windshield reflectors you get for summer. So if you cut them back, and all we're really doing is trying to put any heat we're making from these mats upwards into where we want it, into our soil and our tubers, then being lost down below. So a piece of polystyrene, anything you've got laying around, you'll be able to use the same. Again, I use a single LED light. The lights at this stage are not important. Even a old fluorescent tube you might have from an old light system, some kind of light bulb, anything with just that cool light will be enough to get them started. We don't need anything special at this stage. And then we've got obviously some more of our tubers in. So how do you get one set up? What I should also add is, in terms of your heat mats, these are on 24 hours a day. So at this time of year, that's probably fine. But as we do start to warm up, you've got to think a heat mat effectively heats the ambient air to about 10 to 12 degrees above it. So at 3 degrees now, we're still only pushing into the 13 to 15 degrees, which might still be slightly colder than these tubers want to be. So, but during the day, because they're in this enclosed space, as you can see, excuse the mess because this really is just a work in progress. This used to be an old vat room, as a side note. So the vat for the old dairy, where all the tubers are kept, which is through this side of the wall, this would have been where the milk was stored and refrigerated and everything like that. And as I'm taking over it and reclaiming it, shall we say, it's now becoming a functional workspace / office. So I do find that even though it's cold outside, the heat in this room is quite well insulated. So it's quite warm in here, even on a cold day, which will help increase that temperature slightly for the tubers. But as it does get warmer, we do need to watch that those heat pads don't ineffectively overheat, because once the days are getting to like the 18, 20, then we're pushing into the 30-degree mark on the heat beds. So an easy solution to that, and I do have one, but I can't show it because it's currently on loan to one of our dear friends. You can buy a thermostat control, and they're about $20, $30. And basically your heat mat plugs into that, and then you can set it to, I usually set them about 22 degrees, and then they automatically switch on and switch off once that heat mat is at that temperature. I could also have found that so far I've got 4 heat mats running through the one thermostat control, and we've had no issues in terms of short out blanks or anything else. Not to tell you that you recommend doing that, but it works for me. So typically when I'm starting my tubers up, I am choosing tubers which are a bit ugly and deformed. Nothing wrong with them, and they grow wonderful plants, why I'm using as cuttings. But typically they're not ones I want to sell or give to people, or they might just be too small, because whilst they still grow into very healthy plants, and in many ways I do actually prefer a small tuber, going back to the same reason why we do cuttings, and the energy storage, lazy teenager, etc, etc. So today's knobbly tuber is Carlos Watermelon, and I'm sure most of you watching will know who Carlos is. So Carlos is an amazing pinky orangey tone, I think you'd call it. Dahlia, which is classed as an informal because it's quite like, I call it like a star, a bit like a cross between a Stella variety and informal. but it's very sought after at the moment. So I have Carlos, I have a pot, and then I want a tag, and I have this amazing tag system, which I can just go, ta-da! So if you are looking at buying one, it's not a plug by the way, but Innovative Tags, which is our Victorian company, and these are perfect for me in the garden. So then what we're going to do is find some very good compost, and as you see I have a rather large pile of it here. Comes from a local company, and it's the best compost around. You can just see how viable and just how healthy it is. And this is going to be kind of hard one-handed, I know. But basically we're going to fill her up, or him, and I'm going to try and adjust it. So basically I want the crown just underneath the surface. So some people will leave them out by about 1/4 of an inch out, which works, whatever works for them. I prefer to have them under the ground because I like to replicate nature the best I can. And once the shoots start coming up out of the ground, I can still scratch around there quite easily and get down to the tuber to take my greens. So, and onto the heat pad with Carlos. So in terms of duration now, we're looking at about 2 to 3 weeks. Given we're still quite early in the season, some may take a few weeks longer, but because they're so close to the top, you can have a scratch around without doing any damage every now and again and just see where we're up to, and checking that those eyes are nicely forming. Now in terms of watering, at this stage I will give them a very light sprinkle, like literally just like this. And I may repeat that maybe once every week to 2 weeks, just depending on the heat in the propagation area. Whilst we don't want to water them, like the soil doesn't want to look like it's in the Sahara Desert either. It just wants to be that light, healthy soil moistness, if that's even a word. But if you overwater them, you potentially are just going to rot your tubers. On the flip side, basically remember that tuber has everything that plant needs to survive, but just having a nice warm humid environment is enough to go, well, it's time to start growing. And sorry, I just thought I might have seen her. Hi, come in. It's a stick. Excitement in the babies, I tell you. Sorry, I digress. So basically, yeah, what we're looking for is that warm humid environment where these babies start to go, ooh, spring and summer's on the way, it's time to start waking up and doing our thing. So once we've waited for a couple of weeks, this is what we'll probably start to see. Now this is a variety called Salmon Joy, and I've actually already taken a cutting off her. As you can see in there, if I can point to it, you'll see all these little green shoots. That's usually what happens when you take off an eye. It'll then produce more. So in terms of that one tuber, I've already got one cutting. I've got 1, 2 here. I can probably see 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 potentially. So just from waking her up, from that one tuber, I've now potentially got 7 plants, plus any side lateral shootings and grow tip shootings I take throughout the season. You can multiply your population quite quickly. As a bit of a caution in terms of sterilization, it's really important that we do sterilize everything we can to the best of our ability while we're taking cuttings. I would also recommend that unless it's just for your own personal use and you're trying to safeguard a new variety, for example, your tuber came and it was a bit squishy, or you've had to remove some rot, but it's quite important to do your due diligence to yourself and to others to ensure you've grown that tuber out for at least 12 months, as I do, before I think about propagating to give to people. Because that means I can see that plant has grown healthy all year. There's been no issues with viruses. The tuber stock itself is good and healthy because that's made it through winter. It hasn't just rotted at the first bit of stress. And also that there's no signs of gall or anything in that tuber from when you come. So here on the farm, I actually have a complete separate area where any new plant or tuber comes in, they get grown in that area. And after that 12 months, and I know they're good, that's when I'll go, okay, well, I'm going to divide now and keep them for myself, and then they go into the cut flower side of the farm where I'm going to use for my business, because obviously if I get an infected stock in there, it's a lot harder for me to control that and potentially remove that virus once it's already in my soil. Okay, so here we have plants ready for cutting, as you can see. Nice healthy shoots. Now I'm probably looking, and they may have been left slightly too long, but they'll be fine. So I'm probably looking for a good couple of inches, like you saw on the other plant before, where they're very healthy and they're quite small. That one at the back's probably just getting there. But for me personally, I'd like to have it slightly bigger, like these ones. So it's easier to handle and see what we're doing, especially when we're doing it for the first couple of times. Now, being a spontaneous filmmaker as I am, I have just realized I left the tripod, so you can see what I'm actually doing when I do my cutting, over at the other side of the farm. So come for a walk and see the cold, wet, wintry garden. So here we have a limping border collie because she's been running all day yesterday and has pulled a muscle in her right paw. So this is Fanta. She's our youngest border collie, and grandma at the front is Whisper. We do have another one called Sky, and she is probably hiding somewhere, and she is coming down the path behind us. She's my panda bear. So down this walkway we cross to our garden. So if you haven't seen our tree before, so this tree actually fell down on the day of settlement. And we said, what the hell do you do with a tree? So we turned it into a feature, and now it's a very healthy environment for frogs and also our goldfish. Our Muscovy ducks decided that they needed to pay a visit over the weekend, and that's why it is now so murky, but it will clear up again in a couple of days. This is our gazebo, which was our dahlia garden. So all my personal collection go in here and surround it. So it's quite a nice little area, as you can imagine, during the warmer months, to sit and watch and let life go by. Currently my winter project is that I have to re-oil it, so that's why it's a bit of a mess at the minute. There's no springs in the air because the jonquils are all out, and even our gladioli were up out of the ground yesterday. I've now covered them with some good quality compost and given them a good feed. But yeah, they were amazingly, they're out the ground so early. And the winter hellebores under the liquid amber are all coming up too, and putting on quite a big nice show of colour. So they've only been in the ground 18 months, some of them even this season, so it's going to take a while to fill that area, but they're well on their way. Oh, there you go, there's the gladdies. So you can see, look, amazing how advanced everything is this year. And we've got our snapdragons, and even some of our enemies. So they're a bit like a poppy, and I've never really thought much of them, but this year they've actually had quite taken to them. I might have to look at putting some into our cut flower side of the farm. Right. And you've been here before, this is where all my dahlias are kept. So while we're here, we might as well stick our head in. Excuse the guinea fowl. They're just waking themselves up for the day. So here are all my greens, which are taken over autumn. And going, and as you can see, we have a Carlos watermelon just about to open. And we have a Siska at the back. And we have a new one I bought called Speckles. And our pink ice proteus are well and truly in flower. And even our ranunculuses, which I think I spoke about in June or even late May, had started flowering, and they're probably nearly done now, but the white ones are just starting to come through. And I can't remember what colour these are, but they came from the Green Church, aka Bunnings, in their discount range, you know, like for $1 a pot or something. So there's 2 pots in there. Look how healthy they are this year. So if you've got some patience in life, always grab a bargain when you can. Anyway, we're digressing, but we'll head back over to the workshop. Of course, we're never far behind. We're at a border collie in tow somewhere. What are you doing? And we have our little poddy calves. Even Big Mama Cow down the bottom. And Boris the pig over the back, who's working up our next patch for the dahlias. So this will become the cut flower farm this year. As you can see, I've just started doing some of the rows. And as we cut up the driveway, Again, look, all the poppies are just starting to come out as well. So I think they're the Flanders poppies. If it's not dahlia related, let's face it, I just make it up. And we head back into the flower farm side of the farm, if that makes sense. So as you see, the rows are all now done, and then we've got our irrigation in for these ones. And this is my fail as such. So when you're doing a green manure crop, and there's a number of reasons why I do green manure, but it's about feeding the soil. So if we feed the soil, we feed the microbes. The microbes are then release starches and sugars, and that is what your plants eat. So you want to keep that entire cycle going all year round, so that the soil's ready, well, for me, for the dahlias, to get the best out of the soil, and they're not having to wait for the soil to get kick-started when we plant them in November. So fail for this bed was I planted rye, which in Australia, rye is well known as a livestock feed, but it's also a cereal crop. And what I needed to plant was rye, the cereal crop, which can be easily terminated with a whippersnipper come November or 6 weeks prior, and then just allowed to rot into the ground. Whereas rye, as in grass rye, keeps growing like a lawn. So I've got a whole bed to manually remove before November. Thankfully, I only put 1 row in before I realised. So that's a little tip for you. The rest of them have now been planted with a mix of legumes, the cereal rye, there's some wheat. Basically, I bought a green manure mix, which has been put through all the beds, and they'll be coming up in a couple of days, and keep those beds covered, suppress the weeds, and we'll be ready to plant in November. As you can see, Gareth's been making our new shade house, which will have all the cuttings in once they've actually got their roots, and then keep that process going from off the heat pads, hardening off, and then into here, before they'll either get sold as garden ready plants, or they'll make their way out into the beds and beyond. So in terms of planting mediums, there's a couple of options. You can go with a recyclable cardboard pot with some sustainable peat moss, or I think this is coir. Coir sounds better than core, but you know, I'm from Yorkshire, we do say things how they sound. So core, with some perlite mixed in there. And that's quite good if you're not able to mist as regularly as you need to if you're using more of a perlite mix or a dry sand mix. So that'll help keep the moisture in there. Jiffy also make these little biodegradable Jiffy pots, and they do work really well. They say biodegradable. The netting will last a couple of years in the ground. So I prefer, as soon as I've seen a root come through, I actually get rid of this. I also find that the tubers will form, but they'll form through it all. And it can be quite a mess when you're dealing with a pot tube at the end of the season, trying to get rid of this. But for starting them off in, they're quite good. Also from Bunnings or the Green Church, you can buy a little greenhouse which will hold 8 of them, and they work really well as well for this purpose. Now, if you need to buy these little jiffies, they come as a little pellet like this, and when you soak them in water, they then swell up. They don't have a hole, so in terms of, I just put your finger in, you can use the end of a screwdriver and just give it that little dipper, so you've got somewhere to secure your tuber when you put it in. All right, and in terms of, before we get started, sterilization. So what you're going to need is either a solution of 10% household regular bleach mixed in water, so 10 ml to 100 ml, or if you're on the hop like I am today, Ajax. 99% of niner germs will do the job too. A scalpel is what I strongly recommend. You can use a very sharp pair of scissors, but really one of the biggest things which increased my success rate with taking cuttings, I believe, was the scalpel. If nothing else, just that. And getting that right clean cut where you want it, without, because basically if you're using anything which isn't that sharp, we're crushing the cellulose, cell walls of the stem, which then promotes dampening off and rotting instead of what we want, thriving and forming roots. So as you can see, I've been doing this for a while just to make sure that's really clean. And your choice of rooting hormones. Some people use it, some people don't. Some people like powder. Basically, I want a gel because I prefer to see that it's actually well coated, because when you pull it out the gel you can still see it. And also look for a soft wood. So basically, because we're using soft plants at this stage, we don't need the higher percentage of chemicals which are in there, which this one has butyric acid. The higher percentage rate is obviously a stronger dose, which is what they can use for the hardwood cuttings such as roses you take in winter. Now, because I'm on camera and we're doing everything 100% correctly, decant into something so you can throw that away. It's not a good idea just to dip straight into the bottle, but you know, when the camera's not rolling, we all do things slightly different sometimes. Anyway, so I'll move them to the side for the moment, and then we're going to try and attack. So as you can see in here, we've got the tuber coming up, you've got the base of the tuber here, and then we've got a really good healthy shoot here. Now there's two trains of thought. Some people will take right down here and they'll get a piece of that, nick a piece of the tuber out with it, and that will go into a plant. The only thing is, what you're effectively doing then is removing the eye. And if you remove the whole eye area, you've got one plant, nothing else can grow in that spot. Like as I showed you before, and I'll just go and grab it. On Salmon Joy, where I previously took that cutting before, because I took it just above, I've now got all new eyes forming, and that won't happen if you take it on the tuber. So depending what your goals are, that's the choice you need to make. So for me, I'm going to try and get you to see it too. I'm going to go, there's probably quite a few here. Just on, and you see we've got quite a good length of cutting there. We've got a main growing tip, we've got two side leaves, we've got a second pair where more growth will come from, and we've got these here. So to start with, I'm going to take off these two cuts here. Now be careful when we do this, because obviously in there will be two little laterals forming, and I don't want to remove them, because my understanding and belief is that that's where your eyes will be for your following tubers next year. So at the risk of having tubers which either are formed but then blind and don't produce a new plant for us, I want to leave that, and I call it like a bit like a heel. You can see just inside that little, almost like a V shape now. And then what we're going to do is just trim this back to about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters below that leaf node. So just probably where that little brown bit starts, finishes. Like that, a nice clean sharp cut. Now because we're going to put this in the ground, we're going to try and we can get rid of these ones. We don't need them, they're going to be irrelevant, and we don't need to worry too much about removing those little shoots already forming, because by removing them, what will happen is roots will actually come out of here too and there and give you a healthy plant. Now looking at that, these leaves are quite big, so there's more exposure area for moisture to be lost as we go through. So I will cut them down a bit in size, and you have a good size cutting about there. And then after a good dunk in my hormone, and you can see I like the gel because, like I said, I've got a good amount on there, in we pop it, and I just like to firm it in so we get nice lot of root contact with the surrounding area. I'll go again with this one. Now, as I say, I have left these quite a while longer than I probably would have hoped to. So you can see they're quite healthy in advance, but that's fine. We can trim all this back, and we can even take a cutting from here. If you were being really advantageous, you probably could take a cut in there and try doing leaf cuttings off these two nodes here. This is Florally Toffee, by the way, and if you haven't seen Florally Toffee, it's by Laura Lee, aka Florally, in Ballarat in southeast Victoria, southwest Victoria probably more likely. And it's amazing cut flour. So I'm just going to go in there and remove those side shoots again, and I'm going to remove these two because they're a bit big and on the go, and I'm going to remove these because we've got quite a lot of growth already at the top there. Now, because I'm working on a sign plant, I haven't re-sterilised. If I was going to go to a different tuber, I'd be sterilising this in between moving to each new tuber. And as you can see now, so what I've got here is just on the very bottom here, I've got my two little side shoots, which is where my eyes are going to form for next year's tubers. I can just pinch that there a bit more, because they're going to be irrelevant. And I've effectively got two leaf nodes where roots can form as well. Now, the taller they are, the harder it is then to get the rooting hormone all on them. But if you kind of do that and hold it upside down for a couple of seconds, it does. If you're not worried about losing a bit, you can do a bit like that. Now, and then the dabbler, and in we go, and just slightly firm it down. So there we go, there's our two cuttings. And of course, don't forget your two labels, probably just before you go to bed. And do that for the first 4 days, and then after that you should be able to backtrack. As you can see, I've got a couple in here which I took the other day. So here we have, I can't remember who. Actually, sorry, that's that Salmon Joy one I was talking about, where I've taken the cutting off. And if you can just see, I've got a couple of roots just starting to form there. I wouldn't recommend just pulling them out and checking on them, because you may break the tiny hair roots which are forming. As you can see, this one has rooted. This one, as you can see, now ready for planting, and that has been in there 11 days. So it's got a really good healthy root ball and ready for planting. And as I said, these ones I use are also made by Jiffy, so they're exactly the same as the peat mott's, apart from they're pre-formed with the slit in the top, so you don't need to have the netting, and they work really well in terms of the dahlias. So I'm currently trialing this bed, and I've to see whether that was better than doing different soil mixes. And look, at the end of the day, they all root really well. For me, and doing a large number of them, I find that using these is easier, because as you can see, I'm literally just picking them up, pulling and dropping them into new pots when repotting. So it's a big time saver for me, and that offsets the added expense of buying this way versus making up your a good compost mix with some perlite in there, and even some sharp river sand would do as well. So I hope this video has been helpful for you if you're thinking about taking some greens this spring for your own dahlia collection. If you want to know anything further, or you'd be interested in learning more in a one-on-one workshop, I'm looking at doing some online workshops this year. So please drop a comment, stick a like, or just let me know, and we'll hopefully get them out, or some dates lined up for September, October. All right, all the best, have a great day, stay warm, and Jamie out. Thanks for watching our video, guys. Don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and the alert button if you want to stay tuned for what's coming up next. Have a great day.